Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in for another Tuesday Cruiser Chat with Otram. Same gig as normal, no real plan for this evening. So just whatever questions you guys have got, I will try to answer them. Trying to think of shop updates. Nothing super awesome to update at the shop. I did some work on the Shop 80 over the weekend. Did rear brake pads, rotors, calipers, wheel bearings, parking brake, all that jazz, and filmed those for the channel. I got the pads, calipers, rotors video edited and uploaded. Still working on editing the other two videos, but those will be up soon. The 80 series 1SZ crank holding tools are back in stock. If you've been waiting for those to come back in stock on the website, got those in from the water jet cutter this morning, and got them blasted and painted and broached before I left the shop this afternoon. So those are drying overnight, and those will be ready to rock out in the morning, if you guys have been waiting for them. Trying to think what else. That's all. I think that's all that's new at the shop. Nothing real fancy coming. Yeah, the Shop 80 is crusty underneath. The more I look at it, the worse it gets. But it was dirt cheap, so it's fine. And it's not like I'm going to daily drive it. It's just going to be a wheeling rig and shop truck. So we'll probably do some scraping and blasting at some point and paint the big stuff. But otherwise, I'm not super concerned about it. It's made it fun. All the fasteners are kind of seized on it. Like I had to manually lock the e-locker to get the axle shafts out, and I broke one of the cover bolts off taking it apart, which is awesome. And I haven't fixed that yet. I just slapped the cover back on with the last two bolts, and I'll deal with that next time I've got shop space to pull it in. But yeah, it's gonna be a project, but it'll get there slowly but surely. It'll definitely be good fodder for videos. It's nice to have something that I can use to shoot videos on that I don't have to hustle and, immediately get it put back together, because a customer's waiting. I can pull it apart on the weekends and, take my time with it, which is nice. Yeah, I think next up on it will either be the front oil seal leaks and water pump that's leaking, or rebuild the knuckles and the wheel bearings. I've definitely got to do the wheel bearings in the front before I can get it through inspection, so I may as well do the knuckles while I've got it apart, because the knuckles are leaking on it. Just trying to decide if I'm going to go ahead and put RCV shafts in while I've got everything taken apart. And yeah, they're Toyota Reman calipers. Usually I use the Napa Eclipse, but our local Napa has been going through like employee changes and orders keep getting dropped. And my order of the Napa calipers didn't come in, so I grabbed some from Toyota, which kind of made it a pain because normally I get the rebuilt calipers with the brackets on them already, so you don't have to buy the rubber boots and the clips and everything separate, like I did with the Toyota ones. But yeah, not bad. Looking at doing FJ Summit with my 80, just doing some preventive maintenance for the trip. Have you ever seen a brake line rust from the inside out? All the time. Nobody seems to flush their brake fluid as often as you're supposed to. And brake fluid is hygroscopic, so that it absorbs water out of the system. And once it's gotten to its capacity for absorption, it lets it back out and rots the lines, the calipers, the wheel cylinders, everything from the inside. And it can be a mess. And a Christian, if your brake fluid is low, it may just be the pads are low, but you've more likely got a leak somewhere. I would dig around and go, I would look for leaks really closely before digging into pads and rotors and all that. We've seen a lot of them with the lines rusted out of them. So I'd look real closely for leaks. And a Stan FJ40 F-Series engine rebuild or upgrade. If it were me, I'd probably upgrade to a 2F or a 3F. We're actually in the process of swapping an F motor for a 3FE fuel-injected motor right now. Just about got the wiring harness finished up on that today. I am not a fan of putting non-Toyota motors in Land Cruisers. I kind of feel like you bought a Land Cruiser for the reliability and the drivetrain. Why mess with that, putting something else in it? I'm sure there are people that can make the American stuff reliable, but I don't know. I'm a Toyota purist in that regard. I'll swap other Toyota engines in, but like we won't do Chevy swaps or anything like that at the shop. Just Toyota swaps. The 3F upgrade, that's a good question. This one's the first one I've done, and it's taking me quite a bit longer than I anticipated. Like if I regularly did them based on what I'm doing this one for, we would starve to death. That said, doing it a second time around, I could probably do it faster, since I've already worked through a lot of the kinks. And this one, like on this one, we're doing 3FE with an H55F 5-speed, and he provided the donor 62, so it's weird. But I want to say it's like 15K is what we're billing, but that doesn't include the donor motor transfer case or the the donor truck for the wiring harness and all that jazz. So yeah, it's hard to say. Realistically, it'd probably be about 20K. With the new shop, list of first things you plan to do as far as engine and preventative maintenance. Don't really know. The plan is basically keep doing stuff like we're doing. We just need more space because we're too cramped with just the 2.5 bays we've got now. So it'll add more space. Yeah, we've got a couple of jobs that have been waiting for inside storage space. So that'll be nice because we'll have extra room where we can keep more trucks inside at a time. Oh, shop truck. Shop truck, yeah, it just did the rear brakes. I'm not sure yet. I'm either going to do the front oil leaks and water pump next, or rebuild the front axle and do front brakes and wheel bearings next. But yeah, beyond that, no super plans. And I need to do exhaust at some point because the exhaust is falling off of it. Any ideas to upgrade FJ60 brake master cylinder? I don't know that there's any master cylinder upgrades because the cylinder size it's a relationship with the calipers and the rotors, or not the calipers and the rotors, the calipers and the rear wheel cylinders. So they all kind of need to stay matched. If you go to a larger diameter brake master cylinder, you're going to lose line pressure. You'll have more volume but less pressure. So it's a fine balancing act that Toyota's generally gotten pretty good. So as far as I know, there's not really any upgrade you can do just to the brake master cylinder. And maybe you're talking about the booster, but I'm not sure on an upgrade there either. The only time we deviate from the factory master cylinder is like when we're changing things around, like changing disc brakes or things like that, because it's all matched together. So like on a 40 series, if we go and change it from drum brake front to disc brake front, we'll use a Toyota Master cylinder from a truck that had front calipers, front discs, and rear drums. Or if we're swapping in like 80 series axles under something that didn't originally have them, we'll swap in the 80 series master cylinder with it to keep all the ratios the same. But yeah, back to the shop truck. It's going to need so much stuff, and it's one of those. It doesn't really seem like it matters what order I do it in, because it all needs to be done. I started with the rear brakes just because the wheel cylinders were the rear axle seals were leaking so bad. It was just puking gear oil onto the brakes, so I knew those had to be done. But yeah, the more I look at it, the more there is that just has to be done. So we've got quite a ways to go before we get back to beyond the just baselining it phase, and I can actually start upgrading. Yeah, I think disc front drum brake's normal for the 60, so I would probably just stay with the factory brake master. Yeah. The shop truck is definitely going to be a low budget, scrounge it up where I can, kind of truck. Ideally, I would build my own bumpers for it, but out of not having time, I'm probably going to end up buying bumpers for it. But yeah, the idea is to do it cheaply as possible. And the Vicken e-lockers, when you put it in 4-low, the symbol doesn't pop up on the dash and the lockers won't engage until I bypass the switch on the transfer case. Is the switch faulty? If everything works after you've bypassed the switch on the transfer case, it's a pretty good bet that the switch is faulty. There's also the chance that the transfer case motor either isn't going into low range or isn't fully going into low range, so it's not hitting the switch do the switching, but the switches do go bad fairly common. I've never tried cleaning them. It's a sealed unit. We've always just grabbed new ones and just swapped them out that way when we've needed a switch. More often we need them because they're broke, like somebody's broken the connectors off of them, rather than them actually being bad. But they're easy enough to swap with a new one. So that's generally how we do it. And to Victor, I'm not sure what size a 60 series Master was originally. But if you can change different diameters, I would pick as close to the factory as you can. If you're planning on doing sliders and exhaust, is it more convenient to do the exhaust first? Yes, especially if you're going to do like the downpipe off the manifolds. A lot of times when people have got sliders on, we've got to pull the passenger side slider off to be able to change the downpipe, especially on the 95 to 97s, because a lot of times you can't wiggle wiggle the cat past the front slider leg. So if you're doing both, I would do the exhaust first and then the sliders. But on most of the designs, it's not a huge deal to pull that passenger slider back off if you have to. Yeah, I've also got to figure out if I'm going to make sliders in-house for the Shop 80 or if I'm going to buy sliders. And I guess I've got to get around to actually making exhaust for it, since I'm probably going to use one of our stainless exhausts on it, even though that's like super overkill for this truck. And maybe once I get the Shop 80 built, I can go back and actually finish putting my 4Runner back together. We started getting it ready to wheel like last summer, and then kind of lost interest in it and pushed it back out in the parking lot. So yeah, I've got way too many trucks to mess with and not nearly enough time or money. If I break the antenna on the 80, it will just live with a broken antenna. Replacing the mast itself isn't bad. And actually, I think it is already broken. The mast is. But so is the radio that controls it. So it wouldn't be good for making a video. The mast itself isn't bad to replace. It's when you have to replace the whole assembly. And it's not bad getting the motor assembly out. It's the way they ran the antenna cable all the way to the radio without any connectors. And there's a grommet where it runs through the side of the cowl, like behind the fender. And there's a grommet back there that gets rock hard. And you've got to like fish your arm in through a hole in the fender and try to pop it loose. Yeah, it's terrible to get that grommet out. So I will just be living without an antenna if I have to go that route. So far, so good on the shop truck. The brake lines are holding. I did a stainless rear drop line when I just did the rear calipers, just because I was going to have to bleed the system anyway. And I got the whole set of stainless drop lines and went to do the front ones. And one of the front fittings was wanting to twist the hard line off. So I just soaked it down real good in penetrating oil. And when I go to do the front axle, I'll try it again because I've got to rebleed the brakes anyway. But I was concerned about snapping the fitting off the hard line if I kept messing with it over the weekend. But yeah, if I do, I'll either get new lines from Toyota because what's still available is really cheap, or I'll just make new ones out of nickel copper. I hate making brake lines, so I try to avoid it if I can. To John, if your antenna pops up some and it's still going, it sounds like your motor's probably still working, just the antenna mast is stripped off inside. So you might be able to just fix the mast. You take there's a little chrome trim ring on top, you pop that off, and then have somebody turn the radio on, and it'll spit the antenna out, or sometimes you have to pull it and reel it out. And then you just stick the new antenna mast down in, like it'll look like weed eater line. And you just kind of feed it down in with the gear teeth kind of facing the motor and have somebody turn the radio off and it'll suck it back down. And then you put the little trim piece back on. But yeah, usually it's not bad. Tried to swap the rims off a 94 FJ80 onto a 4th gen 4Runner in the front. It hit the caliper. Can I shave the caliper or the rim to make it fit? You really don't want to shave either, especially not the rim. The rims usually aren't very thick in the area where they would make contact with the caliper. I shaved the rear, I think it's the rear calipers on my 4Runner that's running 80 series axles. I shaved that caliper a little bit, and it's kind of sketchy, but it was just a trail truck, so I wasn't super concerned about it. But yeah, it's best to not shave the calipers or the wheel. ABS light is on my LX450. Is there an easy way to check it? It has been forever since I chased ABS on an 80 series or an LX450. I'm pretty sure on those you've got to use the jumpers under the hood to get the codes, and it does the code blanks. I'm pretty sure you can't read those through the OBD2 port, but I might be wrong. If you can read it through the OBD2 port, a higher end scan tool should be able to pull the codes. If not, you'd have to look up online the jumper configuration to jump it under the hood in the little checkbox and get it to blink the codes. And I'm pretty sure that's a jump it under the hood and count the code blinks kind of deal. But again, it's been forever since I've had to mess with one. And now that I've said that, it's going to throw a light on my truck. But generally, when it's the speed sensors, at least as far as I've seen them, it's not the speed sensor itself. It's like metal shavings or something is collected on the magnet and is making the signal funky. So a lot of times you can, pull a sensor out, clean the end off real well and stick it back in. Of course, like if it's a front one and you're getting metal shavings on it, that means your burr fields are on their way out. But the rears are real bad because they're kind of open to the elements, and the rears will collect all kinds of crap on the end of the sensor. I just had to scrub the ones on the shop truck clean. There was all kinds of metal shavings on them. But yeah, and if it's front speed sensors, I think they only come as both of them and the entire harness, like up to the firewall as a set, and are stupid expensive. But I could be wrong there. I am not up on my flat towing technique. Safest way would be to pull the drive shafts out of it. That way it can't accidentally go into gear. It can't accidentally go into gear and run everything backwards. But I am not an expert on towing. I mean, theoretically, you could get away with just doing the rear and unlocking the hubs, but there's, always the chance of something stupid happening and spinning the front one. A lot of people do it just putting both cases in neutral, or the transfer case neutral and the transmission in neutral, but it's safest to drop the shafts. Unless you're only going a little ways, I guess. And I keep forgetting I can look up factory service info from home. So I'll look up how to pull the ABS codes real quick. If you replace the air filter and it's stalling in reverse, most likely the accordion boot that goes from the mass airflow sensor to the throttle body is torn. They're real bad for cracking in the accordion, like in the folds. And when you go in reverse, the engine tilts over and pulls the crack open, which lets a bunch of unmetered air in and then stalls the truck. Uh, so the first thing I would do would be to check the air intake tube really closely for cracks. And yeah, to check the ABS codes on the LX450, it is a jumper, the pins. It's jumper terminals TC and E1 in the little diagnostic port, and then you have to count the codes. FJ60 2F stock 4-speed training rebuild kits don't come with gears synchros. How to troubleshoot what's actually wrong with it. The easiest thing is to open it up and see what's going. Like, you can usually visually tell real quickly if synchros are gears or shot. I've done quite a few 4-speed rebuilds. Most of the time we get them for bearing noise. So we just, the rebuild kits are normally just bearings. You can still get the synchros from Toyota. I'm trying to remember. There's 2 different synchros that go in there, and I think it's 3rd and 4th gear are the cheap ones, and 1st, 2nd is the ungodly expensive one. If it's popping out of gear, it could be worn bearings that are letting things, slop around. You may need synchros, and depending on which synchros you need, if it's the stupidly expensive ones, it would likely be cheaper just to find another 4-speed, even like a used good 4-speed and swap it in. Or find a used good 4-speed, replace all the bearings, and put it in. I'm trying to think. I think the one we did that needed synchros needed 3 and 4. And I think those were the cheaper, but I could be wrong. Because it was like 3 years ago that I did the one that needed synchros. I'm trying to think of anything else. Well, I don't know what, you can usually pick up a used 4-speed for $250. And I want to say the more expensive of the 2 synchros was like $800. Because it's like a whole assembly. Like it's one of the gears and the synchro built together, where the other ones are just the little brass synchros that you can get separately. I'm talk radio. I should move my little microphone over so you can see it, and then I'll feel like a talk radio host. But yeah, without actually seeing inside the trans, it's hard to really tell what you need. I guess it could also be a detent spring in the actual shifter assembly, but that's pretty rare. Oh, do you by chance have a body lift on it? Because if you have a body lift, you could just be knocking it out with the body. Today, JW, I always send the head out when doing a head gasket. It's an aluminum head, and they're really long. So, like, I've never seen one that wasn't warped. They've all got some warp to them. And, if you just clean it up and put it back on, you've still got that warp. So there's a really good chance, you're going to blow your new gasket. So I always send them up to the machine shop. They pressure test them. They check the valves. They clean it up real nice. And then they mill the block or the head surface back straight. And around here, it's like $180. When you're going in that far and doing that much work, it would really suck to put it all back together and have it leak again because you didn't deck the head. And I have no idea on the Highlanders. I don't think I've ever even ridden in one. All we do at the shop pretty much is Land Cruisers, so I don't know anything about them, unfortunately. And to Jamie, 80 is vibrating pretty bad while accelerating, especially around 50 to 60 miles an hour. Rolls super smooth as soon as you let off the gas. Check the drive shafts. Drive shaft slip joints and U joints can do that. It can also do that if you've got a pinion bearing going out. So if you jack up one tire on each end of the truck to release the bind from being all-wheel drive, you can feel the drive shafts, but I would bet that you've got a drive shaft that's getting sloppy. And to JW, like, we've had them normally when the machine shop cuts them for us, they cut 3 to 4 thousandths off. And we just use a factory gasket and everything is awesome and, hunky-dory. The one we just did that's in the videos had to get cut like 15 thousandths. And that one had to get an extra thick head gasket to make up for the thickness so that the timing chain would be the right length. It's not a matter of the timing chain being too loose. The tensioner will take up the slop. It's that it'll be rolled. The timing will be off between the cam and the crank because of the change in length. And Toyota's, a reliable brand for the most part. Everybody's got their duds, but Toyota seems to have far fewer than the rest. And to Vicken, I only use the factory Toyota parts whenever I can, which they don't have a rebuild kit. You'll be able to get a gasket set from them. But like the pistons, the rings, the bearings, all that's going to be separate, and it's all going to have to be measured by a machinist. So yeah, the best bet, if you've got a local machine shop that you trust, take the new block to them, let them tear it down, do all the measurements, and likely they'll have a brand that they like using. We use all Toyota whenever we can, but it gets really expensive really quick. And I'm not sure. Pickering bearing. I'm not sure what that one is. I mean, we can always do another head gasket. We generally do them in the truck. Yeah, I mean, it's not a bad job. We do, I don't know, we do quite a few of them. But yeah, I got no problem with doing more in the shop. We're booked out about 2 months right now, would be my guess. But yeah. Oh, the bearing in the drive shaft pinion, Pinion. It's the gear or the bearing that's just inside the differential that holds the pinion gear. Those are not easy to replace. To do it right, you got to take the whole diff apart so that you can set preload without the axles or anything loading it. Yeah, not a particularly fun job. Not horrible on the rear, but a lot more complicated on the front. And to Devil Dog Trucker, good source for an extended drive shaft for an LX450. I've never gone searching for one. I don't know. We use the factory Toyota drive shafts all the time. I've never run across the need for a longer one. How much lift do you have that you need a longer shaft? Yeah, I've never run into needing a longer one, so I've never gone looking. I know Land Tank does dual cardan shaft, and they could probably make a longer one of those. Make a longer one of those while they're at it, or Tom Woods or Adams or any of the big drive shaft shops. And on average, how much is it to do a head gasket? Head gasket would be, it's roughly, I want to say like 2,500. It's been a while since I've quoted one just as a head gasket job, but 2,500 rings a bell. And the pinion bearing would not cause clunking noise in turns. That would be your CV shaft, or your Burfield joints. Those are the only ones that are really going to change noise while you're turning. Or I guess if you had a really, really, really bad wheel bearing, it could do it. And Dave, are you talking about wheel bearing kit or knuckle bearing kits? Wheel bearings, yeah. Big ones, the inside wheel bearing. Little ones, the outside wheel bearing. But yeah, and I think the 80 series knuckle video, I do the wheel bearings at the very end. So when in doubt, check out the video. Oh, and a Devil Dog Trucker, you're asking when to get an extended drive shaft. When you run out of slip joint, which is kind of hard to quantify. But basically, if you pull the splines too far out, they'll start to wobble. So you don't want to take them out too far from where they were stock. But generally on the 80 series, the way the suspension, since it's all coil sprung, the drive shafts move with the suspension links, so you're not getting an incredible amount of extra length. It's not like when you lift a leaf sprung truck and it kind of pulls the axle back more. So yeah, most of the time, unless you're going like super duper tall, you don't need extended ones. And to the shoulder guy, Do you have any idea how high the transfer case breather outlets go? It depends on which series of truck. Okay, 100 series. It depends on the generation of 100 series. Like the early ones, the breather line went up into the dipstick tube. So it's, up as high as the dipstick on the 4-speed ones. The 5-speed version, I've never actually looked to see where the breather goes on those. So I'm not sure. But the 4-speed version feeds into the dipstick tube. Best rule of thumb on whether you need an extended drive shaft: if it falls apart on the trail, you need a longer drive shaft. If engine oil loss between valve stem seals or rings, it's a little bit of both. We see a lot more going through the valve stem seals. Generally, when we see a smoky truck come through burning oil, it's usually valve stem seals on the 1FZ. Although I have seen them blow past the rings. Like a lot of times, if it smokes real bad when you start it after it's been sitting, usually that's a pretty good indicator that it's valve stem seals. Or if it puffs after sitting in a stoplight, like if you've been idling and you get on the gas again and it puffs smoke, usually that's valve stem seals. Yeah, I figured that's what you were talking about. If it's a ton of oil loss, like it continuously smokes, like going down the road, that would probably be rings. But if it's just off and on smoking, usually that's valve stem seals. For 2.5-inch lift on a 97, longer drag link or longer control arms needed? Not really. We do, a ton of 2.5-inch lifts and don't do anything with the control arms or drag links or panhard bars. The panhard will go, anytime you lift it and keep the factory length panhard bar, you're going to go a hair off center. But with the 2.5-inch lift, it's not enough that you really notice it. The longer length stuff seems to be more, when you get up into the 3.5, 4-inch range. But yeah, the 2.5-inch lift, we just do the caster bushings and, let them go with all the factory linkages. Dave's asking me a hard question. I believe all the 80 ones went over the rear cross member after the muffler, but I'm not positive. I can't recall ever having seen one that goes through the shock area. I think factory they all went over the rail, but I'm not positive. Super low oil pressure at low RPM. It's the factory gauge is not accurate. So to really understand what's going on, you need to put a manual gauge on. But super low oil pressure at low RPM, is probably worn main bearings. Those are the biggest contributor in oil pressure because the oil pressure is built by the restriction of oil flowing through the main bearings. So if those get super worn out, when you're slow going, the oil pump's not spinning fast, so the oil's just kind of hemorrhaging out. As you get faster, the pump's spinning fast enough that it can build pressure against those bearings, even though they're sloppy. But, it's hard to say without putting an actual manual gauge on it to read it. To JW. Generally, we order the Toyota factory. They call it the valve grind rebuild or valve grind gasket set, and we just get them from our local Toyota dealer. The Toyota seems to be the best quality as far as gaskets and seals. Generally, we don't wait for the machine shop to get done with the head. I've only ever had to order a thicker gasket once after doing probably 50 or 60 heads. So it's not a common occurrence. Normally the factory head's just fine. We had one other head that was warped too much to use a factory gasket, but it was so far gone that we had to get a different head. So we ended up just using a factory gasket with the new head. So yeah, normally, and even using like the Cometic thicker gasket, we ordered a Toyota valve cover or valve grind gasket set to have everything else in the kit because it was cheaper to buy it as the set than to buy all the bits individually, even though we weren't using the head gasket out of it. And yeah, to Dave, they're talking about right after the cat. The 93, 94 1FZs went over the frame rail. 95 to 97s went under the frame rail after the cats. And to Sullivan, thoughts on rear airbags? Generally, they're a pain in the ass. If you're constantly changing loads, like going from empty to full, then airbags can make sense, but they tend to pop when you don't want them to, and they're a pain to keep having to adjust. So if you're going to always carry roughly the same amount of weight, I would just get springs to compensate. Let's say worst case, bad main bearing. What are the options as far as that to repair? Used motor. That's obviously better, like a better used motor. There's a company called Jarco that does rebuilt 1FZs. I've only installed one of them, but they seem to be decently done. You could have a local machine shop rebuild your motor. I'm not a huge fan of that because I don't think local machine shops are going to hold the tolerances that Toyota did, but maybe some do. Our local ones don't. Or you can get a new short block from Toyota and reuse your head and build everything around it. That's generally how we write them because you're getting a whole new crank, bearings, pistons, rings, block, and then we just build them up with new parts around them. And then you're getting mostly new. We rebuild the head, but it'd be a mostly new motor. And yeah, the head gasket looks bad. It's really not as bad as it looks. Just really take your time, mark where all the bolts came from, take pictures as you go. But it's not horrible. Replacing the rear main seal. What other seals are good to replace at the same time? Nothing really crosses with the rear main seal. Depending on what truck you've got, if it's an 80 series, reseal the actual holder for the rear main seal. But like earlier trucks, you could do the oil pan while you're in there, but none of the labor really crosses between the two. 80 series is leaning 1 inch lower on the driver's side than the passenger side. Springs are on the correct side. Any idea why it's leaning? The bumper with swinging out could do it, but I would doubt it. Have you tried swapping the springs just to make sure? Because you like 99% of the time we see them, it's the springs are on backwards. And a Devil Dog Trucker first mod doing on the LX450 after I baseline it. Probably suspension lift, although I might paint it first. So yeah, probably suspension, although I'm not decided on what suspension I'm doing. Yeah, if you swap the springs around and it still is leaning the same way, that's weird. Yeah, I mean, I would guess it'd be a weight issue. And to solve it, yeah, 9480 series, doing the rear main, I would just do the rear main and the arch seal, like the glued in piece. While you're in there, there's not really anything else that crosses over. And Robert has a good point to check the air in the tires. And also make sure you're on actual flat land. Our parking lot at the shop is really lumpy, and we'll pull trucks out after doing a lift, and they'll look really screwy. But if it's an inch off height difference all the time, that wouldn't account for it. Yeah, I don't know what else would cause you to be an inch off other than like weight being more on one side. And the shoulder guide 2003, I think, was still a 4-speed trans, so it should be up as high as the dipstick tube. I think the 5-speed trans didn't come out until 04 or 05. I think 2003 is still 4-speed. Anyway, if you've got a dipstick, it's in the dipstick tube. The 5-speed transes don't have dipsticks, so it's easy to check that way. You guys need to go out. You going out, Joe? So you got front drive shaft vibration with the double cardan, thinking it's a front yoke. It's been forever since I've messed with a double cardan shaft. Those are such a pain to change the joints in. I always just took them to my drive shaft guy and let him do them. Because I was always really good at messing up the joints in the double cardan, trying to get the spider or roller, whatever that thing is that connects the two U-joints in the cardan. If you've got front drive shaft vibration and you had it with two different drive shafts, I would look at your angles, and I would also look at your pinion bearings, because the pinion bearings can make and I guess the transfer case output bearing also can make it feel like drive shaft but actually be in the pinion or the transfer case. And to JW, thanks for the thanks. Yeah, it's always fun getting on here and doing cruiser chat and helping folks out. And to Jim, the dogs, the blue heeler corgi mix, the kind of white flecked one, that's Atticus, and the all black one is Trillian. My wife's got a thing for naming all the animals literary names. So Atticus is Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, and Trillian is Trillian McMillan from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And they're good dogs. They're actually pretty quiet tonight. Usually they tip tap and fight behind me while I'm doing chat. Oh, and I will. Thank you, Dave. She will be happy to hear that somebody else was paying attention to her book stuff. And go have fun at concert. I haven't used, well, I can't say I haven't used Bach Toyota. When I lived in Boston, I got parts from Bach. But I just use either Beano or my local Toyota dealer. My local Toyota guys like stock a ton of Land Cruiser stuff for me because I go through so much of it, and they give me a good discount. So I use them quite a bit. I haven't used TJM springs. They seem to come and go from the U.S. market. I guess maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, one of their salesmen called me to try and get me set up to sell the TJM stuff. But then I could never get a real good answer out of him for what they were stocking or what prices were. So we left it alone and never actually dealt with them. Awesome. Glad the videos are helping folks out. Trying to get a little bit better at making the videos each time we do them to make them, more clear and easy to understand. But yeah, they're fun to make. They take forever, but they're fun to make. And it's always awesome getting feedback that they're helping folks. '03 IFS 100 series, how high can you lift it before requiring a diff drop? I think the general rule of thumb is you're okay to like inch and a half lift. And once you get over that, you want to look at starting to do a diff drop. Trying to think. I think that's about, I think we do them with anything over like 2 inches. And to Robert, I have sleeve front control arm with Dobbins and 6-inch lift. Do you think the arms are enough? I'm not sure what caster correction the sleeve arms are for. I feel like they're for like a 5 to 6-inch lift, but I'm not positive. And if so, you should be really close. You won't really know unless you go to the alignment shop and have them check caster. But you can always adjust caster from there with caster bushings, I believe, on the sleeve arms, to dial it in completely. Yeah, no problem. Glad you like the pulley tool. Those just came back in stock this morning. Finished broaching and painting a set this afternoon. So they're back up on the website if anybody needs them. It's one of those things. I'd been using like a hodgepodge homemade one for years, and I'd gone through a bunch of different designs. And finally was like, you know what? I'm just going to get these water jet cut because I'm sure more people will need them. And to Sam, yep, I am just getting ready to sign off. But if you have questions, I can answer quick questions. Because my wife's running a bit late tonight, but I'm in charge of cooking dinner tonight. So I do have to jump off fairly soon. Best mod for an FJ80. Supercharger or coming soon, Wits End Turbo Kit. That would be my vote. Anything to make them a little bit faster. I also really like the underdrive high range and lower low range gears. Those are a pretty solid modification. I would vote for our exhaust system if I actually got around to building them often enough. I feel like that's a pretty good mod too. What truck is yours? I feel like it's an 80 series, but I can't remember for sure. '93. We actually just had a 93 in at the shop this week that I was chasing a problem, similar problem. It was like as it warmed up, every time you came to a stoplight, it would kind of stutter and drop down to like 400 RPM and want to die. And his turned out to be the throttle position sensor just needed to be adjusted. It was a little bit off so that when you went down to idle, the engine didn't actually know you were idling. It wasn't clicking the idle switch. So we did a quick tweak on the throttle position sensor. Of course, it took a while to get there because his was weird. It wasn't throwing any codes, no check engine light, and not constant. So, I smoked it for vacuum leaks, replaced the leaky vacuum lines. And went through a bunch of other testing and finally just started pinpoint testing sensors and came up with a TPS that was just a little bit wonky. And we adjusted that and it's been fine since. And to Vicken, thanks for the thanks. Yeah, I would check the throttle position sensor first. It's a pretty easy check with feeler gauges and a voltometer. And once we got there, it was a pretty quick fix. Yeah, it's two screws that hold the throttle position sensor from turning, and you put different sized feeler gauges in against the throttle stop, and it's like with 20 thousandths feeler gauge, you should have continuity between these two pins, but at 50 thousandths, it should be this resistance, and you just dial it until it's right. It's pretty quick and easy. And to Robert, I mean, we probably could use a louder, rumblier muffler in our exhaust. I really like the Solo Performance because it's got a nice mellow rumble and it doesn't get drony. So I've been real happy with those. It's a little bit louder than stock, but not bad. Okay, and if we've got Sam's question solved, or at least pointed out, oh, now we got June. I would only change the rod bearings if I had an issue with the rod bearings, but if I had an issue with the rod bearings, you also likely have an issue with the crank. Uh, so I would probably leave them alone. Um, and the errand about the soft e-brake lever having to pull it all the way up to engage. Check the bell cranks, the pivots on the rear where the cable's attached. Those get sticky a lot. Otherwise, going through and adjusting it, you adjust it at the rear wheels. You pop it off. There's a hole through the rotor, and you run the adjusters up until it's snug, and you can't turn the brake drum or brake rotor, and then you back it off 8 clicks, I believe, and that usually gets you in the ballpark. I actually recorded a video on doing the parking brake and the adjustments over the weekend. I just haven't finished editing it yet. Cool. And yeah, I'm going to go ahead and sign off of here so I can start cooking dinner. But thanks to everybody that tuned in this evening. And if you haven't, please subscribe below. And if you really dig the videos and chat, check out our Patreon link down below in the description box. And to learning woodworking, low compression on 1 cylinder in my 80 series, about swapping in a used motor. Used motor, if you can find a used motor from somebody that you trust, it can be a good option. I would consider doing a head gasket and freshening up the top end while it's out and everything's easy to get to, because it's super easy to do a head gasket when it's on the stand. But yeah, if you can find a good running 1FZ with a good history, it makes sense to do a used motor. Cool. And I'm going to pop off here for real this time. I will catch you guys next week. Thanks again for tuning in.